Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere even stranger than your uncle's Facebook posts. The origins of Halloween and its trippy fungal secrets. That's right. Tonight we're talking about the bizarre, brain-melting history of hallucinogenic mushrooms and how they might have shaped the original Halloween. So before you get comfortable, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. And drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. Now, dim those lights. Switch on a fan for that soothing white noise. Get cozy. And please tuck your feet in so the imaginary witches can't nibble your toes. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered why Halloween has so many skulls, skeletons, and pumpkins with faces carved into them? Why do we dress up, run around at night, and sometimes end up covered in glitter, sugar, or regret? Where did all these traditions start, and why are mushrooms lurking behind every legend? Is there any truth to the rumor that people once saw flying witches because they accidentally tripped on a magic toadstool stew? Would you survive one night in a village where the line between real and unreal was as blurry as your vision after 3 glasses of questionable cider? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in a windswept medieval village. It's late October. There's smoke in the air, turnips on the table, and something orange, spotted, and suspiciously magical in your hand. Good luck. Tonight, the air feels electric and just a little bit dangerous. You step outside, and everyone in the village is acting just a little off. People are whispering about spirits walking the land. Is it really the dead returning? Or did someone spike the stew again? The air smells like wood smoke, damp earth, and a hint of something sharp. Maybe rosemary, maybe regret. Shadows stretch longer than they should. The sun is setting with a bit too much drama, making everything look like a stage set for a ghost story. In every doorway, someone's clutching a candle or muttering a charm, because nobody is sure if tonight you're more likely to meet a wandering ancestor or just trip over the local drunk dressed as Saint Ghoulish. You're not entirely sure whether to feel excited or alarmed. People keep glancing at the hedgerows, as if half expecting them to suddenly stand up and walk away. The old woman who always smells like onions is painting circles in the dirt with her walking stick and offering cryptic advice. Don't eat anything round tonight, dear. Not unless it rolls to you. You nod as if this makes sense. Nothing makes sense tonight. It's the time of year everyone calls Samhain, when the official church calendar says All Hallows' Eve. But the villagers just call it the night the veil is thin. You try to remember why you agreed to come outside after sunset. Maybe it's the thrill of something forbidden, or maybe you just didn't want to miss the only party the village throws that doesn't end with livestock judging. Either way, here you are, trying to look brave while everyone nervously avoids making eye contact with the scarecrow at the edge of the field. Someone next to you whispers that this is the one night the spirits can wander as easily as you can, if not more easily, since they're not wearing 7 layers of scratchy wool. There's talk of family ghosts coming home for a visit. Uncle Ewan's spirit, someone says, once showed up to borrow his old boots, and no one's seen the boots since. Was it a visitation from the afterlife? Or just a particularly creative cousin with cold feet and no scruples? You decide not to ask too many questions. Suddenly, a dog starts howling in the distance. Every conversation stops. Everyone listens. Is it a sign, or is the dog just objecting to yet another round of the mystery meat stew? In this village, it could be either, and both would be equally terrifying. Someone suggests putting a candle in the window to guide friendly spirits, while another says you should cover every mirror, just in case something decides to step out of it and borrow your face for the evening. The mood is a strange combination of fear and celebration, like a neighborhood block party, but with more existential dread. Children dart through the gathering dusk, giggling and shrieking, clutching root vegetables carved into faces that are meant to scare away ghosts, but mostly just look confused and slightly disappointed. Adults pretend not to notice the flask being passed around, but their stories get wilder as the night grows darker. Every tale ends with a warning. Never look back, never walk alone, and for the love of all that is holy, don't follow the dancing lights by the river. As the bonfire crackles to life in the center of the village, you catch a glimpse of something flickering at the edge of your vision. Maybe a person, maybe a trick of the smoke, maybe that suspicious stew making its grand return. The old men swap tales about seeing a white lady gliding down the lane, or a shadow that whistles your name. Nobody admits to being scared, but everyone stands just a little closer together, as if warmth could protect you from things that don't even need doors. You realize this night isn't just about fear. It's about letting yourself believe, just for a moment, that the impossible might be true. Maybe that's why people spike the stew. Maybe that's why the children run wild and the adults pretend not to be watching the sky for omens. For one night, it's okay to let your imagination run loose with the livestock and blame every bump and creak on a visitor from the other side. Eventually, as the fire dies down and everyone shuffles back toward their homes, you can almost convince yourself nothing out of the ordinary happened at all. But you lock the door, double-check the windows, and keep a candle burning, just in case the veil is thinner than you thought. And someone, or something, decides to come calling. You spot a mushroom so red it looks photoshopped. Locals call it fly agaric. Is it poisonous? Absolutely. Is it also the star of half the village's bonkers legends? You'd better believe it. In the hedgerow, this mushroom looks almost cartoonish. White spotted cap, glossy and daring, practically waving at you like it's about to host a children's show and teach you a new swear word. You'd be forgiven for thinking it was painted by someone with too much free time and a very specific grudge against culinary safety. But no, this is the real deal. The Amanita muscaria, the original do not eat me sign of the forest, and also the reason why your neighbor Gerald once tried to have a conversation with a fence post and lost the argument. Tonight, the mushrooms are everywhere. The elders say that if you see a ring of them, you're looking at a fairy circle, which sounds charming, until you realize it's actually folklore code for stay away unless you want to wake up with twigs in your teeth and a new perspective on reality. Even the livestock avoid these things, and this is coming from animals who willingly eat their own bedding. Of course, that doesn't stop anyone. Not here. Some villagers say the fly agaric is a curse left behind by witches who couldn't be bothered to clean up after their midnight raves. Others swear it's a secret portal to the other world, but only if you eat exactly 3 slices and recite a mildly embarrassing childhood memory out loud. No one seems to agree, but everybody is convinced the mushrooms are watching, and somehow you believe it. The local healer, whose idea of medicine is equal parts hope and unidentifiable root, uses fly agaric in everything from nervous complaints to excess imagination. She swears a pinch in your tea will let you speak with your ancestors. You're not sure if she means in the spiritual sense or the literal, since the last time someone tried, they spent an hour apologizing to a loaf of bread they thought was Great Uncle Alric. You wonder how a mushroom that can send grown adults into a night of philosophical debate with their own shoes ended up being so central to village tradition. But here's the thing. People in the Middle Ages were living in a world with more questions than answers. Why do cows sometimes just stare at walls? Why does the bread occasionally scream? What's that thing crawling out of the well? Instead of ignoring the weird, they baked it into their calendar, sprinkled it on their festivals, and sometimes into their soup. Fly agaric is basically the medieval version of pressing shuffle on your brain. It isn't just a peasant thing, either. The local priest knows about the mushrooms and is very much not a fan. His sermons around this time of year are less about fire and brimstone, and more about avoiding the red devil's hat in the meadow. He's tried to have the whole field dug up, but the mushrooms always come back, usually in more artistic formations, sometimes spelling rude words, depending on how much rain the village has had. Children, naturally, are forbidden from touching them, which means that every child in a 5-mile radius is an amateur mycologist with a death wish. You see them daring each other to poke the cap or daring each other to eat one, which they never actually do because, even at age 6, no one's that brave or that foolish. At least, not since the Great Laundry Incident, when a neighbor's son ended up convinced he was a goose and tried to migrate south for the winter. What you learn quickly is that in a village like this, the fly agaric isn't just a mushroom. It's a warning, a tradition, a challenge, and the original excuse for showing up late to work. Sorry, I accidentally stepped in a fairy circle and debated my own existence until sunrise. Try putting that on a timesheet. As the night grows colder, and someone inevitably starts a story about the time they saw a red cap wink at them, you realize that the Amanita isn't just part of the folklore, it is the folklore. It's the reason people believe in fairies, witches, and the deeply unsettling possibility that the dead really do walk on Halloween. Or maybe it's just what happens when life is hard. The nights are long, and everyone needs something to blame for their bad decisions. So, tonight, you step carefully. You give the fly agaric a polite nod, as if to say, "Not tonight, thanks." It gleams back at you, daring you to look away first. In this village, you never know which side of reality you're going to wake up on. And sometimes, you suspect, neither does the mushroom. Dinner is suspiciously colorful tonight. Someone's thrown a handful of wild mushrooms into the pot, and suddenly your neighbor is singing to the cows and swearing he can see ghosts. Was this tradition? Or just Tuesday? You stare into your bowl with a sense of trepidation, swirling the broth as chunks of orange, red, and the occasional mysterious blue float by. It's impossible to say which mushrooms are edible, which are medicinal, and which will turn the whole evening into a low-budget opera performed entirely by barnyard animals. But you eat anyway, because in medieval times, dinner is less about flavor and more about survival, and also because refusing the food is considered bad luck, especially when old Hilda is watching from across the table, daring you with her single eyebrow and a sly grin. The room is thick with the smells of smoke, stewing onions, and that indefinable earthy funk that comes from cooking with whatever was found in the forest that day. Someone claims they found the mushrooms under a willow tree, which means they're either magical or at the very least, unlikely to kill you immediately. This passes for quality control. There is no FDA, just Farmer Derek's approval, and he once ate a rock because he thought it was a boiled potato. As you take your first bite, you're hit with the texture of a slightly slimy sponge and the aftertaste of raw hope. Is it good? Hard to say. Is it food? Debatable. Is it going to rearrange your concept of reality before dessert? Very possible. Nobody's sure if the mild tingling in your lips is a sign of impending doom or just another side effect of medieval seasoning, otherwise known as whatever was growing near the door. It doesn't take long for the fun to start. Cousin Edith begins quoting poetry she claims to have received in a dream, even though it's mostly just the lyrics to Ring Around the Rosie sung backwards. The village blacksmith, who's built like an ox and generally only grunts in full sentences, has suddenly developed the ability to whistle like a nightingale. At least, he thinks so. It actually sounds more like a chicken in distress, but no one is brave enough to tell him. And then there's the singing. It starts with a gentle hum and quickly becomes a full-blown chorus of off-key voices serenading the cows, who, to their credit, have the good sense to look mildly offended. The local priest tries to restore order by offering a prayer, but halfway through he forgets the words and starts listing every kind of cheese he's ever known. The goats appear to be judging everyone. If you see a spectral figure dancing in the corner, you don't say anything. You just nod politely. After all, everyone deserves to let loose on feast night, even the recently deceased. You begin to notice that this is not exactly an accident. The villagers seem a little too enthusiastic about dinner tonight, glancing at one another with the kind of knowing smile that says, "We're all in this together," at least until someone tries to milk the rooster. You realize that mushrooms are more than just a food here. They're a communal experiment in pushing the boundaries between reality and the stories people tell after dark. Nobody calls it a trip, of course. That term hasn't been invented yet. And besides, most of the villagers never leave the village. But everyone knows that sometimes, after a certain kind of stew, the world gets softer around the edges. The old stories say that on nights like these, you're closer to the spirit world, able to hear things you usually can't, see things that aren't quite there, and maybe even settle an old argument with your late Uncle Fred, who only appears when someone eats the yellow mushrooms. As the fire burns low and the shadows on the walls start to dance, you realize you're not scared. In fact, you feel connected, not just to the villagers and their endless capacity for chaos, but to every hungry, slightly reckless ancestor who ever looked at a mushroom and thought, how bad could it be? In a world that's cold, hard, and unpredictable, dinner like this is as close as anyone gets to magic. And if tomorrow you wake up with a headache and vague memories of playing chess against the family cat, well, at least you know. Here, a colourful stew means you've survived another night, with a story to tell, a tune to hum, and a strong resolve to maybe skip the mushrooms next Tuesday. Or not. After all, tradition is tradition. Dinner is suspiciously colourful tonight. Someone's thrown a handful of wild mushrooms into the pot, and suddenly your neighbour is singing to the cows and swearing he can see ghosts. Was this tradition, or just Tuesday? You stare into your bowl with a sense of trepidation, swirling the broth as chunks of orange, red, and the occasional mysterious blue float by. It's impossible to say which mushrooms are edible, which are medicinal, and which will turn the whole evening into a low-budget opera performed entirely by barnyard animals. But you eat anyway, because in medieval times, dinner is less about flavour and more about survival, and also because refusing the food is considered bad luck, especially when old Hilda is watching from across the table, daring you with her single eyebrow and a sly grin. The room is thick with the smells of smoke, stewing onions, and that indefinable earthy funk that comes from cooking with whatever was found in the forest that day. Someone claims they found the mushrooms under a willow tree, which means they're either magical, or at the very least, unlikely to kill you immediately. This passes for quality control. There is no FDA, just Farmer Derek's approval, and he once ate a rock because he thought it was a boiled potato. As you take your first bite, you're hit with the texture of a slightly slimy sponge and the aftertaste of raw hope. Is it good? Hard to say. Is it food? Debatable. Is it going to rearrange your concept of reality before dessert? Very possible. Nobody's sure if the mild tingling in your lips is a sign of impending doom, or just another side effect of medieval seasoning, otherwise known as whatever was growing near the door. It doesn't take long for the fun to start. Cousin Edith begins quoting poetry she claims to have received in a dream, even though it's mostly just the lyrics to Ring Around the Rosie sung backwards. The village blacksmith, who's built like an ox and generally only grunts in full sentences, has suddenly developed the ability to whistle like a nightingale. At least, he thinks so. It actually sounds more like a chicken in distress. But no one is brave enough to tell him. And then there's the singing. It starts with a gentle hum and quickly becomes a full-blown chorus of off-key voices serenading the cows, who, to their credit, have the good sense to look mildly offended. The local priest tries to restore order by offering a prayer, but halfway through, he forgets the words and starts listing every kind of cheese he's ever known. The goats appear to be judging everyone. If you see a spectral figure dancing in the corner, you don't say anything. You just nod politely. After all, everyone deserves to let loose on feast night, even the recently deceased. You begin to notice that this is not exactly an accident. The villagers seem a little too enthusiastic about dinner tonight, glancing at one another with the kind of knowing smile that says, "We're all in this together, at least until someone tries to milk the rooster." You realize that mushrooms are more than just a food here. They're a communal experiment in pushing the boundaries between reality and the stories people tell after dark. Nobody calls it a trip, of course. That term hasn't been invented yet. And besides, most of the villagers never leave the village. But everyone knows that sometimes, after a certain kind of stew, the world gets softer around the edges. The old stories say that on nights like these, you're closer to the spirit world, able to hear things you usually can't, see things that aren't quite there, and maybe even settle an old argument with your late Uncle Fred, who only appears when someone eats the yellow mushrooms. As the fire burns low and the shadows on the walls start to dance, you realize you're not scared. In fact, you feel connected, not just to the villagers and their endless capacity for chaos, but to every hungry, slightly reckless ancestor who ever looked at a mushroom and thought, how bad could it be? In a world that's cold, hard, and unpredictable, dinner like this is as close as anyone gets to magic. And if tomorrow you wake up with a headache and vague memories of playing chess against the family cat, well, at least you know. Here, a colourful stew means you've survived another night, with a story to tell, a tune to hum, and a strong resolve to maybe skip the mushrooms next Tuesday, or not. After all, tradition is tradition. The night sky glows with bonfires meant to ward off evil. The air smells of burning wood, roasting turnips, and something else, something sharp and earthy that makes you sneeze and see strange shadows flickering in the flames. You're not sure who started the first fire, but now the whole village is lit up as if trying to outshine the moon. It's a community project, which means half the people are arguing about proper firewood stacking, a third are adding secret ingredients for luck, and the remaining few are just here for the snacks and gossip. Someone swears by adding sage to the flames to keep away evil spirits. Someone else swears at the sage because it smells like old socks and now all the ghosts will be insulted. Children are racing around the pyres with torches, which, in a less medieval era, would be cause for alarm and at least one insurance claim. Here, it's just a Wednesday. The bravest dare each other to leap across the smallest flames. Even as a chorus of mothers wail, "You'll burn your toes off and no one will marry you." You're not sure what the connection is between scorched feet and lifelong romantic disappointment. But it's best not to ask. These people survived the plague. They know things. As the fire builds, so does the atmosphere. Sparks whirl up into the dark, turning the sky into a snow globe of miniature comets. You're handed a stick with something edible, allegedly, skewered on it. Usually a turnip, maybe a scrap of dried meat, sometimes a mystery lump that is, according to local law, good for the sinuses. It's not. You bite anyway, because this is a night for bravery, or at least for making decisions you'll only regret in the morning. The smoke is relentless, curling into your eyes, clinging to your clothes, sneaking into every fold and seam. If you thought you were going to bed tonight without smelling like a smoked ham, think again. You wonder if anyone ever actually kept evil away, or if the real purpose of the bonfire is to give everyone a chance to air out the house and themselves. The sneezing fits begin, first in ones and twos, then in a full chorus. Someone mutters that if the spirits don't leave from fear, they'll leave from the noise. Of course, the bonfire isn't just about smoke and spectacle. It's a ritual, a big, smoky insurance policy against all the things that might go bump in the night or bump you on the head when you're not looking. The elders toss dried herbs and little pouches of salt into the flames, each with a muttered spell or prayer. It's half religion, half habit, and wholly superstitious. You watch as someone throws a piece of bread into the fire to remember a lost loved one. The flames snap it up without comment, and for a second, everyone falls silent, staring into the orange light as if they might see someone waving back. Then the drumming begins. It's not organized, just whatever can be tapped, slapped, or banged together. A pot here, a bucket there, someone's cousin with suspiciously rhythmic knees. The rhythm grows until even the grumpiest elders are tapping their toes, and the local priest looks like he might join in before remembering he's supposed to be frowning. The dancing starts in slow circles, picking up speed as the night grows darker and the shadows lengthen. Every movement is a mix of joy and defiance. A big not today to the lurking cold and whatever ghosts may be loitering in the hedgerows. If you listen closely, you might hear people whispering their worries into the flames. Illness, bad harvests, old grudges, hoping the fire will eat them up and leave only warmth behind. For one night, everyone is allowed to be a little superstitious, a little foolish, and a little bit hopeful that fire and friendship can keep the worst at bay. As midnight creeps up, the fires die down, and so does the bravado. People start to drift home, hair full of ash, clothes perfumed by the village's unique brand of eau de turnip smoke. The night is still thick with possibility, but the fear feels smaller now, singed at the edges by laughter and the stubborn communal power of light against darkness. You stumble home, trailing the scent of roasted roots and wild hopes, and you realize maybe that's the real magic of the bonfire. Not just warding off spirits, but bringing the living closer together. One coughing, dancing, fire-lit crowd at a time. Every year, people claim to see their ancestors wandering the fields. Is it a message from beyond? Or just what happens when you mix bad cheese with questionable fungi? It's a fine line, honestly, and tonight nobody's sure which side of reality they're standing on. As you step outside, there's a low mist curling around the meadows, giving everything a dreamy, half-finished look, like someone started painting the world and then wandered off for a snack. People are huddled near the hedges, eyes wide, clutching shawls and whispering, "Did you see that? Was it a shadow, a spirit, or just old Margaret's cow out for a midnight wander again?" You can never be entirely certain, especially not after 2 helpings of stew and that wedge of cheese that's been ripening since last Easter. It's not that anyone really expects the dead to come calling. It's just that, in a village where every 3rd day feels like an omen, you don't want to take chances. The old stories say this is the one night when the veil is thinnest, a sort of open house for ghosts. Except the snacks are turnips, and the dress code is whatever you died in. You're supposed to leave a candle in the window and set an extra place at the table, just in case Grandpa decides to drop by and critique your seasoning. Some folks bake soul cakes, small, bland pastries meant to appease any hungry ancestor who's still holding a grudge about last year's undercooked potatoes. There's a certain etiquette to ghostly visits. If you see a loved one, you're not supposed to scream or throw a shoe. You greet them politely, offer a crust of bread, and ask if there's anything you can do to help them move along, preferably toward the light and away from the root cellar. After all, the last thing you need is an afterlife infestation. The living are already enough to handle. But let's be honest. In a world where food preservation is less science and more optimistic guesswork, seeing the dead is often code for 8 something that fought back. The cheese is especially notorious. This is not modern cheese, but a lumpy blue-green creation with a personality and possibly a criminal record. The bravest villagers claim it sharpens the senses, lets you see what's really out there. The rest of you suspect it just makes you more likely to have an animated discussion with the coat rack. Mushrooms, as always, add to the uncertainty. Was that a whisper on the wind? Or just your own thoughts sloshing around after an experimental soup? Did the faces in the smoke look familiar? Or did your eyes just cross from staring at the bonfire too long? Around here, nobody wants to be the first to admit they might have eaten the wrong side of the bread. So you blame the spirits. It's easier than blaming your neighbor's hygiene. Of course, once someone claims to have seen their great-aunt Mildred shuffling by the goose pond, everyone joins in. Suddenly the fields are full of sightings. That flicker in the corner of your eye? Definitely Cousin Bram, back for his favorite walking stick. The odd creak in the floorboards? Clearly the restless feet of ancestors, not the result of wood that's been rotting since the last Viking raid. Even the dogs start acting weird, barking at empty corners and then demanding extra dinner, just in case they've negotiated a deal with the other side. You start to realize that, on this night, the village becomes a stage for memory, longing, and a tiny bit of collective madness. The stories of ghostly visitors aren't really about fear, they're about keeping the past alive. Each tale, each sighting, is a way to remember someone you lost, or at least a way to explain why the laundry ended up scattered across the cabbage patch. After all, who can argue with a grandma's ghost? As the night wears on, the mist gets thicker and the stories get wilder. Someone claims to have seen the blacksmith's father riding a pig through the orchard, and nobody blinks. A child swears a hand reached out from the well to wave hello, and everyone just nods. Maybe it was the dead. Maybe it was the cheese. Maybe, just maybe, it was both, working together in a grand, supernatural conspiracy. By morning, the mist will lift, the cheese will hopefully be finished, and the fields will go back to being just fields. But tonight, every shadow might be an ancestor, every odd noise, a secret message, and every strange dream, an invitation to remember what's gone and laugh at what's left. After all, the line between this world and the next is never thinner than when the cheese is extra strong. You're told to dress up as something scary, or at least confusing. Is it to scare away evil spirits, or so your creditors can't find you in the dark? Either way, you're wearing a turnip on your head. To be fair, a turnip helmet is a bold look. Not everyone can pull it off, but you make it work, if work means look like a startled vegetable with trust issues. Around you, the whole village is getting into the spirit of things. The goal is simple: be unrecognizable. Some people go for classic scare tactics, ratty cloaks, fake fangs, the traditional "I haven't slept in a week" under-eye smudge, which, to be honest, is just real life. Others get creative. You see a neighbor disguised as a haystack with legs, and another as what can only be described as mysterious sack with eyes. There's even a child running around with a goose feather mustache and a suspiciously realistic imitation of the local tax collector. That one's drawing more glares than any ghost. Tonight, costumes are more than fun. They're strategic. There's a strong chance the ancient tradition started less out of concern for wandering spirits and more out of a desire to avoid that one neighbor you owe 5 eggs and a bucket of barley. After all, if nobody can recognize you, nobody can ask awkward questions about last year's missing rake. Some villagers take the challenge personally, disappearing beneath so many rags, scarves, and borrowed boots that they end up hiding from themselves. More than once, someone startled their own reflection in a puddle and apologized profusely. But this isn't just about hiding, it's about transformation. For one night, You can be someone else. Someone braver, bolder, maybe even someone who isn't on the run from the village cheesemonger. You could be a witch, a goblin, or, if you're feeling really reckless, a minor local official. It's all about layers. The more, the better. Cloaks, shawls, questionable facial hair crafted from sheep's wool and hope. Your own mother probably wouldn't know you if she tripped over your tunic. Of course, not everyone has access to the same materials. The upper crust might splurge on some imported black cloth or a mysterious mask from the next village over. But for the rest of us, it's DIY or die trying. Old potato sacks, chicken feathers, and the family's least favorite scarf all come together in an ensemble that could be described as avant-garde peasant chic. If you're lucky, your costume might only smell faintly of cabbage. If not, it's basically wearable compost. The result is a parade of the bizarre. You pass by a pair of twins wrapped together in the same blanket, swearing they're the ghost with two butts. Someone else is an undead shepherd, wielding a crook made from two bent spoons and a firm belief in personal branding. The village healer, not to be outdone, arrives draped in dried herbs and mutters vague threats about curses if anyone laughs too loudly. Children, naturally, take things to the next level. They embrace the chaos with gleeful abandon, smearing soot on their faces and sticking twigs in their hair, declaring themselves forest spirits or mud ghouls. One tiny trickster has fashioned a mask out of bread crusts. It falls off every time he sneezes, but nobody cares. He's having the time of his life. The whole night turns into a masquerade of misfits. You can't help but notice that, as the darkness deepens, so does the laughter. Everyone's voice sounds different in disguise, and the usual village hierarchies melt away. For once, it doesn't matter who has land, who owes whom, or who's in charge of the goats. Under the collective anonymity of costume, everyone's equal, everyone's a little ridiculous, and everyone's safe from scrutiny, both spiritual and financial. By the end of the night, you're sweating under your turnip helmet and vaguely aware that you may never get the smell of root vegetables out of your hair. But you also realize you've laughed more in these few hours than you have all month. Costumes, it turns out, aren't just for hiding. They're for letting go of worries, of grudges, of your actual identity, if only for one magical, mischievous night. And tomorrow, when the sun rises and everyone's back to being themselves, you'll all have the same question. Did anyone else see the dancing haystack? Or was that just Gerald again? Either way, you'll never look at a turnip the same way. The local priest is not thrilled about the mushroom business. He's muttering about sin, devils, and people seeing angels with suspiciously large hats. Church attendance has never been so animated. Tonight, you slip into the chilly stone nave for evening prayers, only to find half the congregation grinning dreamily at the ceiling beams. Mrs. Cotter is waving at something that only she can see in the rafters. Old Man Gowan is trying to have a whispered debate with the stained glass saint about the relative merits of rye versus barley. No one's making eye contact. Maybe because everyone's seeing a completely different church right now. The priest, Father Benno, is trying to keep it together. He's already doubled the incense, hoping it'll overpower the earthy tang of mushroom breath wafting from the pews. Every time he tries to lead a hymn, the melody dissolves into fits of giggles, yodels, or, at least once, a spontaneous ode to the dancing goats of Street Hubert. When the altar boy starts humming along with a choir of invisible frogs, Father Benno gives up on singing and skips straight to the fire and brimstone portion of the program. You know he's suspicious of the fungi. This is a man who still hasn't forgiven leavened bread for being too unpredictable. He paces at the front, eyes narrowed, voice echoing against ancient stone. Beware the temptations of the wild woods. The devil lurks in strange places, and he likes his soup extra spicy. You try to look serious, but it's difficult when your neighbor leans over and whispers that he just spotted St. Peter riding a squirrel out the north window. The church itself seems to encourage hallucination. Candlelight flickers across weird medieval murals of fire, brimstone, and beasts with 6 elbows. Every groan of the wooden roof sounds like a lost soul. There's a draft that makes the candles gutter, and each time the shadows jump, half the village flinches and the other half bows in reverence. Someone tries to recite the Lord's Prayer backwards for good luck. The priest is not amused. He's threatening to start using Latin exclusively, which would be terrifying if anyone actually understood it. Father Benno launches into a new lecture, warning that the devil's minions may appear in many forms: a talking dog, a singing potato, or even a perfectly polite mushroom. He seems to forget that half his congregation regularly talks to their livestock on purpose. It's a rural parish. Sometimes the only people who listen are cows. You're honestly not sure whether the priest is more afraid of demonic invasion or of losing control over the village's favorite pastime. Either way, he's fighting a losing battle. The stories are spreading. A baker swears he saw his late grandmother tapping her foot at the Bayat communion rail. A shepherd claims the bell tower is haunted by the ghost of a sheep. Each new tale is met with nods, shivers, and the occasional recipe suggestion. Try boiling with vinegar to get rid of evil spirits. And so, church services turn into group therapy for the metaphysically confused. Instead of confession, you get a lineup of people describing visions ranging from the holy, "A shining figure gave me life advice," to the less than holy, "The Virgin Mary told me to stop eating so many onions." The priest scribbles notes furiously, probably composing the world's least convincing sermon for next Sunday. Some villagers begin wearing extra charms and carrying sprigs of rosemary to church, hoping to keep the visions at bay. Others, emboldened by recent revelations, show up with elaborate hats or fake beards, just in case the angels are recruiting. No one wants to be left out if miracles are happening, even if they're really just mushroom-fueled daydreams. Eventually, the service sputters to a close. The congregation shuffles out, and Father Benno slumps on a pew, defeated by an enemy that grows quietly in the shade and turns ordinary evenings into divine comedy. But the next morning, as the fog lifts and the village returns to normal, well, normalish, you realize that for all his bluster, the priest knows something important. Whether it's faith or fungi, nobody really wants a world without a little mystery. So you light a candle, say a prayer, and hope the next sermon is less about devils and more about forgiveness. Because in this village, sometimes the only thing scarier than a visit from the spirit world is what happens when everyone comes down from the mushrooms and remembers who they sat next to at church. Kids are running from door to door, demanding treats or threatening mild vandalism. Adults pretend to be annoyed, but you can see they're just relieved nobody's asking for mushrooms this year. It's chaos, but it's organized chaos. A ritual as old as the mold in your root cellar. The little ones wear makeshift costumes, all itchy wool and flour-dusted faces, waving sticks and shouting, "Give us cake, or we'll tell the priest about your chicken," if the treat givers are lucky. The worst they'll suffer is a garland of wilted weeds draped over their doorknob. If not, they'll find their cabbage patch rearranged into mysterious, slightly obscene shapes by dawn. Nobody calls it trick or treat, of course. Here, it's known as souling, guising, or, if you ask the village cynic, the annual redistribution of last month's stale bread. The official story is that you give food to the poor and the poorly disguised in exchange for prayers for the dearly departed. The unofficial story is that kids have figured out They can get extra dessert by invoking both ghosts and social guilt. No one wants to risk bad luck, so everyone coughs up a few soul cakes or crumbly oat biscuits, just in case the local ghosts are listening. And more importantly, just in case the neighbors are. You set out a plate of treats by the door, hoping for the best. The bravest child, usually the one with the most twigs in their hair and the least regard for personal boundaries, knocks first. The exchange is brisk. A cake for a prayer for your granny. You hand over a lumpy, slightly charred pastry and receive a muttered promise of spiritual intervention, considering last year's cakes doubled as doorstops. You feel you're getting the better end of the deal. Some of the pastries are, to be generous, experimental. There are hard biscuits that might be better suited as currency. Strange, nutty loaves. And cakes, decorated with what could be raisins or could be beetles. One ambitious mother has gone all out and tried to fashion tiny skulls out of mashed turnip. The result is unsettling, but points for effort. If the kids are disappointed by the lack of sugar, they don't show it. They're just thrilled it isn't a handful of boiled peas. Again. Adults, meanwhile, have mastered the art of the forced smile and fake surprise. Why, what a terrifying little monster you are. Here, take 2 cakes and maybe don't come back next week. They keep an eye on the kids' pockets, knowing that the more treats distributed, the fewer pranks will be played. The whole event is an unspoken agreement. The children get their fill of dodgy pastries, the adults buy a year of relative peace, and everyone gets to pretend this is all very holy, and not, in fact, a low-level protection racket with cuter costumes. As the evening wears on, the ante rises. Some kids sing songs or recite bad poetry for an extra treat. Others stage dramatic reenactments of the local ghost stories, with bonus points for fake moaning and creative use of bed linens. One group attempts a haunting dance routine in the village square. Halfway through, the ghost trips over his own shroud and takes down 2 witches with him. It's an instant classic. Every so often, a parent or older sibling tags along, trying to keep the chaos contained and, occasionally, to pocket a treat for themselves. You spot Farmer Giles supervising his daughter and conveniently sampling every cake offered for safety reasons. If anyone asks, he claims he's checking for spirits. Nobody believes him, but everyone admires his commitment. By the end of the night, the children are sticky, the village is echoing with off-key songs, and every doorstep is littered with crumbs. No one really remembers which prayers were promised or which curses were threatened. The pastries may be questionable, but the memories are gold, especially when shared with a mug of warm cider and the knowledge that, for at least one night, everyone's role is reversed. The kids are in charge, and the adults just hope they've appeased the spirits, the children, and the pastry gods. Tomorrow, things will go back to normal. But tonight, with your cupboard raided and your cabbage patch slightly rearranged, you can't help but smile. This, you think, is what community looks like. A little bribery, a little chaos, and a lot of very bad baking. Some villagers claim to have seen witches flying through the air on broomsticks, but you suspect it's just the mushrooms talking. Or maybe there really is a turnip with wings. Hard to say after that second helping of stew. Tonight, rumours swirl as thickly as the smoke from the bonfire. Someone's aunt swears she saw 3 women whizzing above the church steeple, cackling and flinging chestnuts at the weather vane. Another insists there was a pig hovering suspiciously near the moon, though that might just be the beer talking. You're not sure if anyone here truly believes witches ride broomsticks, but it makes for a great story to keep the kids from sneaking out after dark. You wander closer to the crowd, ears pricked for gossip and maybe a hint of common sense. Old Mrs. Bryn is holding court, waving her cane for dramatic effect. "It was real, I tell you," she proclaims. "A turnip with wings. beating the air like a furious chicken, and right behind it, a shadowy woman with wild hair, giggling fit to wake the dead. Nobody wants to contradict her. For one thing, her stories are far more entertaining than the priest's sermons. For another, she's been around so long, you half suspect she might know a spell or two herself. The kids, of course, are entranced. They start trying to ride broomsticks around the village square, tripping over their cloaks and knocking into suspiciously placed cauldrons. It's not long before someone tries to glue feathers to a root vegetable and send it airborne. The results are less than magical: a lot of mud, some wounded pride, and one very annoyed chicken. The adults laugh it off, secretly relieved the children are busy with crafts instead of demanding more pastries. But the witch rumours aren't just for laughs. You know the real reason they crop up every autumn: fear. This is a world with far more unknowns than answers. Why did the bread rise too fast? Why did the cat disappear and return 3 days later, looking smug? Why does Farmer Emmerich's hair always stand up straight after midnight? If you can't blame the weather, you blame a witch. Or failing that, you blame mushrooms, which are at least predictable in their unpredictability. Someone inevitably starts whispering about the Sabbath, that secret midnight gathering where witches supposedly meet to dance, feast, and maybe plot a little mayhem. The stories grow taller by the minute: naked revelry in the woods, the devil himself handing out party favors, and wild, trippy visions conjured from forbidden brews and hallucinogenic stews. It sounds equal parts horrifying and suspiciously like the last harvest festival after the cider ran out. The church, predictably, is not amused. Father Benno warns everyone about the perils of magical thinking and the dangers of frolicking with fungus. But the villagers can't help themselves. These stories are like a pressure valve, letting off all the stress and strangeness of living in a world that's always on the verge of something: famine, frost, or an outbreak of spontaneous animal poetry. You find yourself watching the sky a little more closely, just in case. That shadow flitting across the moon, witch or owl. The weird bump in the night, spirit, neighbor, or just the stew's revenge. The line blurs easily tonight. And the more you try to make sense of it, the less sense it all makes. Maybe that's the whole point. Sometimes you need a flying turnip to remind you that reality is mostly a matter of perspective, and occasionally, mushrooms. As the night winds down, Bryn leads a procession of children waving their makeshift brooms and root vegetables. They parade around the bonfire, cackling, chanting, and thoroughly enjoying themselves. No one seems scared anymore. Everyone's just delighted to be part of a story that's a little silly, a little spooky, and very much their own. Eventually, you head home, unsure if you've seen witches, flying vegetables, or just the best improvisational theatre in medieval history. But one thing's certain: for a single magical night, the impossible didn't seem quite so far-fetched. You'll never look at a turnip or a broomstick quite the same way again, and maybe, just maybe, that's the real magic at work. You wake up the next day with a pounding headache, a mouth full of straw, and vague memories of arguing with a pumpkin. Welcome to the original Halloween hangover. This is not your average morning after regret. Your head throbs with every church bell, and your tongue feels like it's been used to scrub a cauldron. Every muscle aches as if you spent the night running from your own shadow, which, to be fair, might have actually happened. As you blink blearily at the early sunlight, you try to reconstruct the sequence of events. Was it the mushroom stew, the mystery pastry, or did someone finally test out the healing properties of that suspicious yellow root from the healer's shelf? All you know is you've never been less ready to face the realities of medieval life, which, as it turns out, wait for no one. The villagers call it a visitation. You call it payback for trusting folk remedies and holiday cheer. Last night, everyone was passing around concoctions so strong they could double as wood varnish. Herbal teas promising clear sight or cheerful spirits were ladled out by the mugful, while every self-appointed expert had advice. Try my nettle tonic, cures what ails you. Rub this goose fat on your temples. Works for cows, should work for you. Eat pickled garlic for luck and longevity. If the taste didn't scare off the evil spirits, your breath certainly did. But here's the problem with medieval medicine. No one agrees on what actually works. Healers and grandmothers are locked in an eternal turf war. One swears by willow bark for headaches. Another insists you must hum a sacred chant while hopping on one foot. It's as much superstition as science, and sometimes it's just an excuse to make you look ridiculous in public. Last night, the healer mixed up a special batch of protection brew, part mushroom, part wildflower, all nightmare. It's supposed to keep bad dreams away. Judging by your night, the only thing it kept away was dignity. There's also the issue of questionable hygiene. Need a bandage? Here's a rag that was last washed during the previous king's reign. Wound looking infected? Let's try leeches. Suffering from a sore throat? Gargle with vinegar and hope for divine intervention. For more persistent complaints, there's always the infamous smoke cure, which basically means sitting by the bonfire, breathing in enough fumes to knock out a goat. You emerge smelling like ham and wondering if the dizziness is a sign of healing or just mild smoke inhalation. As you shuffle outside, squinting against the daylight, you're greeted by a parade of equally miserable villagers. Some are clutching their stomachs, others sporting impressive hives from an unfortunate encounter with blessed nettle wine. Everyone is in various stages of recovery and denial. The blacksmith claims he feels fantastic, but you catch him mumbling to the chicken coop, and the chickens don't seem impressed. The healer, meanwhile, is already making her rounds, passing out more herbal remedies. This time, she offers a mysterious powder to restore balance. You eye it suspiciously. Last time you restored balance, you spent an hour walking sideways and singing to a fence post. Still, you take it, because hope springs eternal, and peer pressure is stronger than common sense. You can't help but notice how folk medicine here is part cure, part community theatre. The real treatment isn't the potion, it's the ritual. Sitting by the fire, swapping stories, and groaning in collective suffering. You share tips for the next holiday. Avoid the broodvort green stew. Never trust anything labelled festive surprise. And always check your mug for floating plant matter before you drink. By midday, your headache is fading, your memory returning in odd, embarrassing flashes. Was that really you doing the banshee's jig with a bucket on your head? Did you really challenge a pumpkin to a staring contest and lose? In the end, the hangover becomes just another story, another lesson in the dangerous intersection of holiday cheer and homegrown healthcare. You decide next year you'll stick to plain bread and water. Maybe, or maybe not, because in a village like this, even a pounding head and a mouthful of straw are a small price to pay for a night where anything felt possible. Even winning an argument with a pumpkin. At the end of the night, everyone crowds around the fire to swap ghost stories, each one wilder than the last. You're pretty sure at least 3 involve talking cows and a haunted wheelbarrow. The fire crackles and pops, sending a shower of sparks into the inky blackness. Everyone leans in, faces flickering between shadow and orange glow. The old storyteller, a fixture at every festival, clears her throat. She has a voice like gravel and a talent for making the wind sound menacing. Long ago, she begins, before even I was born. Instantly, the children go wide-eyed. Adults nod sagely. And the cows, who have somehow wandered over, look on with suspicious intensity. It's clear from the start that truth is flexible in these tales. Someone claims to have seen a ghost in the shape of a hedgehog rolling down the lane demanding cheese. Another tells the legend of a phantom pig that visits the granary each year, presumably in search of oats, or possibly just for the drama. The haunted wheelbarrow crops up in multiple accounts. Sometimes it's filled with turnips, sometimes with spectral laundry. But it always squeaks mournfully and only travels downhill, even on flat ground. Someone swears it once chased the baker clear into the river. And the baker, not to be outdone, adds that he's still missing a sock. With every retelling, the stories get stranger. I saw the ghost of old Uncle Hamish. Pipes up a young boy, riding backwards on a sheep, and singing about onions. No one questions the onions. Ghosts, after all, have their quirks. A woman swears she heard her late grandmother cluck her tongue when she added too much salt to the soup. Someone else describes a procession of tiny goblins playing marbles in the churchyard, while a girl quietly admits she thinks the family cat is a reincarnated knight. He has the attitude for it, and once challenged a goose to a duel at dawn. You start to notice a pattern. The weirder the story, the more comforting it becomes. These tales aren't meant to frighten so much as to remind everyone that the world is full of mystery, and that sometimes the only way to cope with darkness is to out-weird it. The children huddle closer, occasionally jumping when a stick snaps or a log falls, but their fear is quickly replaced by giggles. The adults take turns exaggerating their own brushes with the supernatural, everyone trying to one-up each other with a tale more ridiculous than the last. Of course, some stories come with a thinly disguised moral. Don't wander alone at night, warns the miller, unless you want to meet the ghostly midwife who'll ask you 3 impossible riddles and steal your shoes. Another story advises against stealing from your neighbor's turnip patch, because everyone knows the turnip spirits take their revenge in the form of spoiled soup and itchy feet. Even the most skeptical villagers join in, because on a night like this, skepticism is no match for the power of collective imagination, and maybe a lingering dose of the village's infamous mushroom stew. The line between things that go bump in the night and things that go burp in the stew is unusually thin. As the fire dies down and everyone's eyelids grow heavy, the stories wind to a close. Someone whispers about lights dancing in the fields, or a soft voice singing lullabies from the old well. It's hard to say what's real and what's just wishful thinking, but nobody minds. For a little while, fear and laughter have merged into something warm and shared, a feeling that, whatever haunts the fields or the pantry, it's no match for a village full of wild stories and wilder storytellers. Eventually, the crowd disperses. Blankets are wrapped tight, children are carried home, and only a few stubborn souls remain by the embers, still debating the finer points of wheelbarrow hauntings. You head to bed with a smile, carrying a mind full of ghosts, goblins, and talking cows. And if you dream of a haunted wheelbarrow racing through the moonlight, well, that's just the village working its magic, one psychedelic bedtime tale at a time. There's a guy in every village who knows which mushrooms will make you see stars and which ones will just make you sick. He's a local celebrity, at least until someone's goat starts levitating. His name changes from year to year. Old Tom, Nimble Jack, sometimes just that man with the basket. You know who he is because he always smells faintly of earth and mystery, and children run ahead to peek into his woven satchel whenever he appears on the lane. Is he a healer, a chef, a secret wizard, or just a man with an iron stomach and no sense of self-preservation? Nobody's entirely sure. But come autumn, his shadow falls long and his pockets bulge with suspicious lumps. Everyone approaches him differently. Some folks treat him with reverence, bringing small gifts, wool, bread, an egg in a clean handkerchief, in exchange for the safest mushrooms to flavor the stew or treat a persistent cough. Others eye him warily, as if he might accidentally curse their supper or turn their feet blue. Either way, his advice is gospel, delivered in hushed tones with lots of eyebrow waggling. Don't pick the ones with spots, unless you want to spend the night dancing with your own reflection. Never eat a cap that looks like a little hat, unless you're prepared to wear it home. He's the secret spice behind every festive meal. The real reason the autumn stews occasionally turn exciting. If he likes you, he might share a handful of golden chanterelles, or the kind of earthy truffle that makes the village dogs go wild. If you've crossed him, say, by questioning his knowledge or stepping on his favorite toadstool, expect a pile of nothing, or worse, a warning about the cursed mushrooms that grow under the church eaves. You don't want to mess with those. The last person who did spent 3 days reciting prayers backward and apologizing to the bread oven. But his real power lies in his recipes. The mushroom man is the keeper of ancient secrets. How to dry, slice, or pickle the fungi just right. How to brew a potion for spiritual clarity. Read Gentle Hallucination. How to disguise the taste of the less appealing varieties with just a pinch of thyme or a slice of onion. He knows what to add for dreams, what to avoid for nightmares, and which concoctions work best for ailments the healer can't, or won't, treat in public. Everyone has a story about him. Someone's uncle once swore he could see through time after drinking the mushroom man's blueberry cordial. The schoolteacher claims she could finally understand the chickens for a week. Although, honestly, the chickens had very little to say. Every once in a while, an experiment goes wrong. The aforementioned goat incident is legendary. 1 minute, the goat is munching dandelions. The next, it's attempting to leap over the moon. It made it as far as the well. After that, the mushroom man lays low for a week, letting rumors do their work. He's not immune to village politics, either. The priest eyes him with suspicion, muttering about nature's temptations and the risk of opening portals to things best left closed. But even Father Benno finds himself knocking quietly at the mushroom man's door when the bishop is coming to dinner, and a truly impressive stew is required. As the season turns and the first frost dusts the ground, the mushroom man's services become invaluable. Families gather their share, trading secrets and tips, everyone hoping for a year with more laughter than stomachaches. When the harvest festival comes around, he's at the heart of every story. Sometimes the hero, sometimes the villain, always the one with the best recipe for turning an ordinary meal into a night to remember, or occasionally to forget. So when you see him next, basket swinging and eyes twinkling, offer a smile and maybe a loaf of bread. Because in a world where dinner can change your destiny, you want the mushroom man on your side. Just don't ask for the recipe. Some secrets, after all, are best savored in mystery. Cats stare at you like they know all your secrets. Owls hoot ominously. Someone claims to have seen a hedgehog reading Latin. Is it the mushrooms, or is this just a normal Wednesday? Everywhere you look tonight, animals seem to be operating on their own mysterious schedule, entirely separate from the logic of humans. The cats, for one, are everywhere, lounging on windowsills, darting under tables, and occasionally leaping onto laps with the air of royalty visiting the peasants. Each feline wears an expression that suggests they're in on some cosmic joke, and it's probably about you. You try to ignore the way one particularly smug tabby seems to be keeping score each time you drop a crumb. Owls, meanwhile, are working the graveyard shift in the trees, glaring down with eyes as wide as dinner plates. Their hoots come at just the right moments, usually when someone's telling a scary story or thinking about sneaking an extra piece of cake. Sometimes, the sound is so well timed it feels coordinated, as if the birds are following a script. You wouldn't be surprised if the village owls gather every evening to go over the night's spook schedule. It's not just the obvious animals either. The local dogs have been acting weird for days, digging mysterious holes, staring into the darkness, and, in one case, barking for a solid hour at a wheelbarrow that might or might not be haunted. Chickens cluck anxiously, rabbits thump warnings, and someone swears their goat refused to enter the barn after sunset, which, considering the barn's reputation for housing mysterious shadows, and at least one very angry spider, is probably just good sense. The most persistent rumors, though, swirl around the witches' familiars. People whisper that the village cats are spies for someone or something, reporting back every night with all the secrets they've gleaned. That would explain why your cat always seems to appear just when you're about to do something embarrassing, like eat pickled onions straight from the jar or attempt the two-step with a bucket. Superstition runs deep, and if a black cat crosses your path, you're expected to throw a handful of salt over your shoulder and pray you haven't just doomed yourself to 7 years of slightly stale bread. The old women in the village take full advantage of all this animal-related suspicion. The healer insists her 3-legged cat helps her sniff out bad omens, while Mrs. Darnley, who incidentally owns 5 owls and a suspiciously literate hedgehog, claims she can predict the weather just by watching the way her pets sleep. It's all a bit much, but no one dares question them. Not after last winter's incident with the mysteriously missing mittens and the cursed rooster. Sometimes, though, the animal antics are less spooky and more absurd. A duck walks into the tavern, and everyone stops to see what it'll do next. It does nothing, just stands there, looking judgmental, before waddling out. The next day, someone finds a perfectly written note, in what appears to be duck footprints, warning the baker to stop burning the bread. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the animals are just as bored as everyone else, and have decided to get in on the fun. The boundary between natural and supernatural is always thin during autumn festivals, and tonight it's nearly transparent. Are the animals really acting as spirit messengers? Or is everyone just keyed up from too many ghost stories and one too many spoonfuls of mushroom stew? Hard to say, but one thing's for sure. You never want to be alone in the dark with a cat, an owl, and a hedgehog with a library card. By the time you finally head to bed, the animals are still at it. Cats patrolling windowsills, owls gliding silently, and somewhere in the night, a hedgehog is almost certainly conjugating verbs. You pull the covers up a little tighter and remind yourself, in this village, every creature has a story, and some of them are probably funnier and more complicated than your own. Before pumpkins were a thing, you had to carve faces into whatever root vegetable you could find. Some turnips look terrified, others look just plain confused. Much like you, it's festival night, and the entire village has entered into a silent, deeply competitive battle to produce the most ridiculous lantern. The town square is scattered with the corpses of root vegetables, turnip tops, beet skins, 1 or 2 suspiciously mushy parsnips, and a carrot that nobody even remembers bringing. The air is thick with the sharp, sweet scent of freshly scooped innards, and a rising chorus of complaints about the lack of proper carving knives. You're handed a lumpy white turnip the size of a large potato and a dull spoon, and the expectations are clear. Do your best. Don't slice your thumb off. And, above all, create something that will either ward off evil or make it laugh too hard to bother you. The adults try to pretend this is all about tradition and protection, but everyone knows it's really about bragging rights. Last year, Mrs. Mabbott's gourd, with 7 teeth, won top honours, even though it had only 6 and the 7th was, in fact, a small pebble. Children get extra points for creativity. The tiniest lanterns are balanced on fence posts, arranged on windowsills, and, in one case, affixed to the head of a very patient sheep. No one remembers who first suggested carving root vegetables to scare away spirits. But the spirits must have a sense of humor. Some of these faces would terrify a grown man in broad daylight. You try your hand at a traditional design, triangular eyes, a jagged mouth, maybe a wavy eyebrow if you're feeling bold. It's harder than it looks. The flesh of the turnip resists your every effort. The spoon bends, and your masterpiece comes out looking less like a ghost and more like a constipated badger. Still, you set it proudly by the door. Compared to your neighbor's beet, which is leaking suspiciously red juice and glaring at everyone with two mismatched olives for eyes, you're doing just fine. It's only later, as dusk falls and the lanterns are lit, that the real spectacle begins. Candles are wedged inside the hollowed-out vegetables, illuminating their odd features and throwing bizarre, jittery shadows against every wall. The effect is somewhere between magical and unsettling. Some faces grin, others scowl. A few seem to be stuck in existential terror. One ambitious entry is a row of 5 parsnips, each with a different expression, lined up to represent the 5 stages of living through winter. Of course, someone always tries to outdo the rest with a foreign import. This year, Farmer Giles has managed to procure a pumpkin, an exotic orange orb that towers over the humble turnips like a smug noble at a peasant's feast. Its enormous lopsided grin becomes the subject of much muttering and more than a little sabotage. The village children eye it with suspicion. "Too orange," says one. "It probably isn't even scary," says another. When it topples over and rolls into the pig pen, nobody volunteers to fetch it. The real charm, though, lies in the accidental artistry. A crooked mouth here, a sunken cheek there. Every lantern is unique, an honest expression of a night when reality and imagination overlap. The tradition isn't about perfection, it's about laughing at your own handiwork, out-scaring your neighbors, and maybe, just maybe, making the long autumn night feel a little less lonely. As you step back and admire the flickering parade of faces, you realize the vegetables aren't the only ones showing their true colors tonight. In every grinning turnip, drooping beet, and startled pumpkin, you can see the effort, the fun, and a hint of much-needed mischief, proof that, sometimes, the best way to keep the darkness at bay is to greet it with a crooked smile and a very confused gourd. If anything weird happens, milk spoils, cows dance, your uncle forgets his pants, it's easier to blame it on witchcraft or mushrooms than admit you just live in a chaotic world. Tonight, you're living proof. The air is full of suspicion and the smell of slightly burnt bread. The neighbor's goat is staring at the door with an unsettling intensity. And Mrs. Alder claims her cat just recited the Lord's Prayer backwards. Is it a curse? Is it the result of last night's experimental mushroom stew? Or is it just Tuesday? No one knows for sure. But why take chances? Superstition here is less a belief system and more a survival strategy. The weather goes sideways? Must be the witch who lives near the river. Bread won't rise. Obviously the fault of a fairy offended by your choice of socks. The village is a patchwork of rituals and whispered advice. Spit over your shoulder before crossing the threshold. Walk backwards 3 times if you hear an owl. Never accept stew from a stranger unless you want to spend the evening debating philosophy with the family cow. And of course, there are the mushrooms. Every patch of fungi in the forest has its own backstory. Some are good luck mushrooms, said to bring fortune if you tuck them into your boot. They don't, but you get a nice earthy aroma all day. Others are whispered about in hushed tones, blamed for everything from headaches to sudden bouts of interpretive dance. Nobody really knows which mushrooms are to blame for what, so every strange event is chalked up to bad fungus. The great thing about blaming mushrooms is that they're everywhere, they're mysterious, and they can't defend themselves in court. The witch blaming gets especially creative as the sun goes down. You overhear villagers listing their complaints with the resigned tone of people who expect no less from a life lived at the edge of disaster. "My soup went sour," says one. "Must be a hex." "My chickens won't lay," sighs another. "The neighbor's been looking at me funny." The local healer is constantly in demand, doling out charms, potions, and sage advice. Try not to anger any woodland creatures until next week, just to be safe. If her advice fails, she just blames mushrooms and starts again. There's a certain comfort in this. Blaming magic for your misfortunes means you never have to admit you forgot to latch the barn or left the cheese out in the rain. And if the solution is another charm or a bowl of oddly colored soup, well, at least you're participating in the grand tradition of doing something about it. You might not fix the problem, but you've definitely added a layer of intrigue, and maybe a lingering, tingling sensation in your toes. The fear of bewitchment isn't all bad, though. Sometimes it brings the village together. If your neighbor's pig suddenly develops a taste for turnips and starts singing in the middle of the night, everyone shows up to help dispel the evil, which mostly involves banging pots and sharing a communal cup of cider. It's a bonding exercise, really. An excuse for solidarity and gossip disguised as spiritual warfare. Remember when Uncle Hamish blamed the full moon for losing his boots? Turns out, he was just napping in the hayloft again. And so, the cycle continues. Life is full of chaos, strange noises, odd dreams, and the occasional outbreak of spontaneous goat ballet. Rather than admit that life is unpredictable, everyone blames witches and mushrooms. It's easier, it's funnier, and it means you never have to take full responsibility for leaving your laundry out in the rain again. You head to bed comforted by the thought that if anything strange happens tonight, a spoon vanishes, or you wake up with moss in your hair, you'll know exactly who or what to blame. In a world this unpredictable, a little magic, real or imagined, is as much about joy and community as it is about fear. And, frankly, it's much more satisfying to accuse a mushroom than admit you just tripped over your own feet. The fields are dotted with rings of mushrooms. Locals call them fairy circles. You call them a lawsuit waiting to happen. Step inside, and you might not come out the same. There's something about the way these circles appear, silent, perfect, and slightly smug, that makes you think they're up to no good. Nobody remembers planting them. But every autumn, as the grass turns gold and the nights get chilly, the fairy rings crop up overnight like a rash on the landscape. Some are dainty and almost elegant, lacy rings of tiny mushrooms you could mistake for whimsical decor. Others are wide enough to trip a cart horse. A tangled mess of toadstools that look like they're holding a secret meeting. The old stories say you should never, under any circumstances, step inside. Why risk it? Fairy circles, they whisper, are portals to another world, a place where time moves differently, logic is optional, and the food is, somehow, even weirder than what you're used to. If you wander into the ring, warns old Nan, you'll come back with your hair white and your sense of direction permanently scrambled, judging by some of the villagers' haircuts and navigational skills. You suspect a few have already tested this theory. But practical matters loom large. On a misty night, nothing says good evening. I'm an accident waiting to happen, like an invisible circle of low-to-the-ground fungus. You've seen more than one neighbor go sprawling after a misjudged shortcut across the meadow, only to rise with a wild look and a strong opinion about whether or not they saw a fairy knitting socks. The healer's official advice is watch your step and don't wear your good shoes. Unofficially, she recommends walking home in pairs and making sure you know which dimension you're aiming for. Some villagers treat the circles with deep respect, laying down little offerings, bits of bread, a shiny button, or a lock of hair, just to keep on the fairy's good side. Others go the opposite route, shooing children and livestock away, muttering charms, and making the sign of the cross for good measure. You, being a thoroughly modern time traveler stuck in medieval weirdness, try to avoid eye contact altogether. Of course, not everyone is convinced. "It's just mushrooms," declares the blacksmith, right before he accidentally kicks one and spends the next hour arguing with his own reflection in a puddle. "It's a sign of healthy soil," insists the miller, who nevertheless circles the rings with an elaborate detour on his way to the barn. The sheep seem to enjoy the circles, which is either a glowing endorsement or another reason to stay far, far away. At the harvest festival, someone always dares another to spend the night inside the largest fairy ring. The bravest, or most foolish villager lies down in the middle, usually clutching a loaf of bread and a string of garlic, and everyone waits to see if they'll return in the morning speaking fluent beetle or with a new tattoo of a mushroom on their elbow. More often than not, the only result is a nasty cold and some vivid dreams involving dancing turnips. You've learned that, here, fairy circles are more than just botany. They're built-in conversation starters and handy scapegoats. If you're late to work, sorry, got caught in a fairy circle. If you forget your chores, the ring scrambled my memory. If you just want an excuse to nap in the sun, there's always "I must have been fairy-led." So, you keep your distance, nod respectfully at the mushrooms, and leave an extra crust of bread nearby, just in case. After all, in a world where reality is already questionable and every field holds the potential for adventure, it never hurts to be polite to fungi and to avoid the trip hazards, especially if you value your ankles or your sense of direction. Eventually, someone in power tries to ban all the fun. Bonfires are outlawed, costumes discouraged, and the mushrooms, well, those just go underground. Literally. It usually starts with a notice posted by the church door or a pronouncement from the Lord's manor. There's talk of sinful revelry and ungodly traditions. Suddenly, the town crier is warning that all dancing after dusk must cease, and the constable is stalking the lanes looking for illegal turnip lanterns. Nothing strikes fear into the heart of a partygoer quite like the words "festivities strictly prohibited." The same people who last week were howling at the moon with vegetable hats are now expected to stand still, pray harder, and maintain a deeply suspicious respect for silence. Nobody is entirely sure which part of the party was the problem. Was it the devil's stew served after midnight? Was it the fact that old Mrs. Cotter's protective costume was a bit too revealing for the local bishop's tastes? Or was it simply that people were enjoying themselves without explicit permission? If history teaches anything, it's that someone, somewhere, will always decide that laughter is a dangerous gateway drug. The clergy, naturally, lead the charge. They preach sermons with extra thunder, denouncing bonfires as heathen beacons, and warning that anyone found cavorting with gourd lanterns will spend eternity peeling potatoes in the afterlife. The local priest, Father Benno, gets a new lease on dramatic scolding, his voice echoing through the nave as he warns that even innocent root vegetables can harbour evil spirits. You suspect he's just jealous of the attention the turnips get. Meanwhile, the village authorities get creative. They start enforcing new rules: no gatherings larger than a bread line, no singing after sunset, and absolutely no mushroom-related merriment. Mushroom Man is forced to sell his wares in hushed tones, wrapped in brown cloth, conducting his business with all the subtlety of a medieval black market kingpin. You can almost hear him whisper, "I've got the good stuff. Button caps, fresh from the East Meadow. Don't tell the priest." Naturally, the crackdown only adds to the excitement. Nothing is more appealing than a party you're not allowed to have. Secret bonfires pop up on the outskirts of the village, carefully shielded by hay bales and optimism. Costumes are stashed under beds, ready to be thrown on at a moment's notice should an impromptu masquerade break out. Turnip lanterns are hidden in flour bins, and wild stories circulate about forbidden gatherings deep in the woods, where the only invitation is a wink and a promise you won't tell Father Benno. The crackdown on pagan pastimes has some hilarious side effects. People try to disguise their fun as chores. I'm not dancing, I'm stamping grain. That's not a bonfire, it's just a very enthusiastic cookfire. Even the pets get in on it, with cats and dogs sporting garlands under the guise of testing new collars. The more they ban, the more inventive everyone becomes. For every rule, there's a loophole, and for every loophole, there's a villager determined to sneak an extra song or two past the authorities. You quickly realize that banning joy is like trying to outlaw the wind. No matter how many times someone proclaims the end of unholy traditions, the stories, songs, and secret celebrations refuse to die. If anything, they become more potent, shared in whispers, traded like treasure, and remembered for generations as the glory days when parties had to go underground. So the next time someone in power tries to ban the bonfire or confiscate your turnip hat, you just smile, nod, and carry on. Because history proves one thing again and again. Fun always finds a way. And if it has to wear a disguise and carry a lantern carved from an unassuming beet, so be it. The party, much like the mushrooms, lives on, quiet, stubborn, and absolutely unstoppable. After a night of revelry, you're left with foggy memories, embarrassing stories, and bread that tastes like it was baked in the dark, possibly by someone still hallucinating. Your head is pounding, your mouth is dry, and someone has apparently replaced your limbs with sacks of sand. This is the price you pay for letting loose at the festival. The air in the village is heavy with smoke, laughter, and that peculiar blend of gossip and regret that always hangs around after a particularly enthusiastic celebration. It's not just you. Everyone looks like they've been gently trampled by a herd of tipsy goats. Eyes are bloodshot, voices are hoarse, and no one can quite remember how the haunted chicken parade started or who was wearing the turnip hat by the end of it. Breakfast is the first test. The bread, such as it is, arrives at the table dense, grey, and slightly damp, with a crust hard enough to qualify as weaponry. You gnaw on it in silence, teeth squeaking in protest. The taste is unique. Someone claims the baker was up all night telling ghost stories to the dough, and the result is a loaf that tastes faintly of fear and overly ambitious spice. The village healer suggests soaking the bread in weak beer to bring it back to life. The bread doesn't so much revive as it does attempt to dissolve with a faint, resentful gurgle. Over the next hour, rumors begin to circulate faster than the leftover pastries. Who danced on the tavern table? Who was caught serenading the cows? Did anyone actually see a ghost? Or was that just Farmer Ellis in his homemade spectre sheet, scaring himself in the privy? As stories get retold, details grow wilder. By midday, you hear that last night's stew made 2 people speak fluent French, and at least one person propose marriage to a cabbage. No one denies it. The cabbage is the most eligible vegetable in the parish. With every hangover comes a wave of regret. And, sometimes, wild optimism for self-improvement. Next year, I'll only eat the stew, you vow. Or maybe just water. Or maybe I'll move to another village entirely. You know you won't. As soon as autumn comes around again, the same stew, the same bread, and the same questionable decisions will appear as if by magic. And you'll throw yourself right back into the chaos. There's a camaraderie in suffering, though. The villagers gather in the square to share hangover remedies. Pickled onions, boiled nettles, or the classic go lie in the stream and think about your choices. Some swear by an early nap. Others by another round of celebration. Laughter breaks out as someone discovers their shoes have been stuffed with moss and a handful of parsnips. Revenge, apparently, for some forgotten slight. The cycle of embarrassment and forgiveness plays out, everyone comforted by the fact that no one remembers exactly who did what. Then, as the sun rises higher, so does the chatter. Plans are made for the next big night, with everyone claiming they'll be more responsible next time. Children chase each other, pretending to be haunted turnips. Elders compare notes on who snored loudest beside the bonfire. Someone finds a mysterious bundle of herbs tucked behind the door and decides it must be a love charm, or a warning, or possibly just a forgotten lunch. By afternoon, things are mostly back to normal. The hangover fades, the bread gets toasted and rebranded as rustic, and the wildest stories of the night are already being spun into legend. You realize, not for the first time, that medieval life is a loop of chaos, celebration, and recovery. The bread may always be bad, but the memories, the ones you dare to remember, are worth every crumb. And as you eye the last slice of festival bread, you decide, next year you'll stick to soup, maybe. Or maybe you'll just make sure someone else bakes the bread. Either way, you'll be back. Because in the end, there's no hangover quite like a medieval hangover, and no cure better than laughing it off with your equally battered neighbors. To avoid evil spirits, or just indigestion, people stuff their homes with garlic, salt, and any herb that doesn't talk back. Nobody's sure if it works, but at least it smells better than the latrine. You're never entirely clear whether these rituals are about health, luck, or just keeping the neighbors guessing. Every door is festooned with garlic braids so powerful you can taste them in your sleep. The kitchen rafters drip with bunches of rosemary, sage, and suspiciously dried mystery leaves. There's a bowl of salt by the bed, a pinch at every windowsill, and a generous dusting over the stew, just to be safe. It's like living in a pickling jar with central heating provided by paranoia. The local healer is a big fan of these traditions. She claims garlic keeps away everything from ghosts to gout, and no one dares contradict her. Mainly because she's also the only one who knows how to set a broken leg. Her toolkit is a traveling apothecary of roots, twigs, and small pouches of something that could be mint or could be just last year's compost. If you're feeling unwell, her first question is always, "Have you tried more garlic?" Second question, "Have you said a prayer to Saint Flatulence?" Salt, meanwhile, is the closest thing to magical currency. It's precious, hard to get, and hoarded like the world's worst treasure. A pinch here, a sprinkle there, no meal or ritual is complete without it. If your bread fails to rise, it's because you didn't use enough salt. If your cousin gets a mysterious rash, clearly you need to circle him 3 times with a salted turnip. Nobody can explain why, but the ritual is performed with the utmost seriousness, especially if the rash is particularly unsightly. As autumn deepens, the superstitions multiply. You're told to tuck a bay leaf into your hat for safe travels, tie a red ribbon around your ankle to ward off unfriendly glances, and hang bundles of dried lavender to keep the nightmares out. The result is a home that looks like a cross between a soup kitchen and an enchanted forest. But it gives you something to do on long, chilly evenings. And more importantly, it gives you something to blame when things go wrong. Didn't see the ghost? That's the sage at work. Milk turned sour anyway? Must have forgotten the dill. When remedies are needed, you're in for a treat. For headaches, there's willow bark tea, bitter enough to frighten off all but the most persistent spirits. For coughs, a syrup of honey, thyme, and garlic, thick enough to glue your tongue to the roof of your mouth. For weak nerves, you're prescribed a bath in cold water and a sprig of rosemary tied to your wrist, assuming you can find enough water not already claimed for soup or laundry. Of course, not every superstition works as planned. Some are just creative failures. The neighbor who tried hanging onions over his bed to cure snoring woke up alone. His wife left for the peace and quiet of the barn. Someone else attempted a protective ring of salt around the chicken coop, only to discover the chickens now believed in personal space, refusing to cross the line for days. Still, nobody admits defeat. In the village, hope is as stubborn as garlic breath. You realize after a while that these rituals aren't just about protection, they're about control, comfort, and the stubborn belief that you can nudge fate with a clove or a charm. Every whiff of garlic, every pinch of salt, is a vote for survival against the invisible weirdness of the world. Maybe it's not science, but it's tradition, and it brings everyone together, if only to complain about the lingering smell. And so, each season, you prepare. Garlic at the door, salt by the bed, a bouquet of herbs for luck, and a firm conviction that as long as the house smells like an enthusiastic salad, you're probably going to make it through another haunted autumn night, breath intact, spirits at bay. You notice the church has some very interesting stained glass. Are those saints, or just people with giant mushroom hats? Either way, someone was definitely having fun with the paint. It's not just the stained glass, either. Once you start looking, medieval art is absolutely crawling with mushroom-shaped surprises. The illuminated manuscripts, those hand-painted books that monks spent decades squinting over, are full of bizarre borders and marginal doodles. In one, you see a bishop riding what appears to be a carrot. In another, a grinning rabbit jousts with a snail. But the mushrooms, oh, the mushrooms are everywhere. Some are tucked subtly behind holy figures, peeking out from under robes or springing up next to angels. Others are front and center, rendered in loving detail, red caps and white spots glowing like a medieval "Eat Me" sign. Nobody knows exactly what these artists were thinking. Maybe it's symbolism, life, death, and rebirth, the cycle of nature, or the mysterious link between heaven and earth. Or maybe Brother Anselm just got bored of painting gold halos and decided to jazz things up. You imagine a monk, deep into his fourth hour of careful calligraphy, thinking, you know what this page needs? More toadstools. Some art historians insist the mushrooms are code, secret, nods to local knowledge, hidden meanings for those in the know. Maybe it was a medieval meme, the kind of inside joke that only monks with a flair for fungus could truly appreciate. If you know, you know, says the abbot, winking over his goblet of suspiciously herbal wine. Others are convinced that these wild doodles are a sign of something more personal, perhaps a little too much mushroom stew before Vespers. You can't help but see the connections between the art and the nightly tales that circulate around the fire. The villagers claim that certain stained glass windows come alive during festivals, glowing extra bright when the right mushrooms are in season. Children swear they've seen a saint wink, or a halo tilt just slightly when the priest isn't looking. You try to explain it as candlelight and imagination, but deep down, you suspect that whoever designed the window wanted people to look twice, and then tell everyone about it. It's not just visual art either. Carved capitals in the church columns sprout with all manner of leafy, fungi-shaped ornamentation. Even the village's lone statue of Saint Marigold, patron of headaches and misplaced shoes, has a suspiciously lumpy base, like she's standing on a pile of magic mushrooms instead of clouds. When questioned, the sculptor only shrugs. Art is open to interpretation, and, occasionally, dietary mishaps. Of course, the church authorities try to keep things dignified. The priest explains that the strange shapes represent the bounty of God's creation. You suspect he's never seen a real mushroom in his life, or at least not one that can make you see angels with extra toes. Secretly, though, you think even he enjoys the mystery. After all, a church with stained glass that doubles as a conversation starter is bound to keep people coming back. The wildest theories come out late at night, after a little cider and a lot of storytelling. Was that really a depiction of the Garden of Eden, or just a farmer's market fever dream? Did the artist mean to include so many dancing mushrooms, or was it an accident brought on by a bad batch of blue cheese? One villager is convinced the art predicts the future. See, that mushroom looks just like my uncle's nose, and last week he tripped over a sheep. In the end, the art is a perfect reflection of village life. Strange, a little chaotic, and full of unexpected delights. Whether the mushrooms are hidden messages, whimsical doodles, or just the product of a medieval artist's wild lunch break, you're grateful for the color and the conversation they bring. So next time you pass that stained glass window or flip through an old manuscript, take a closer look at the corners. You might just find a mushroom and a little piece of history that refuses to be boring, no matter how many sermons try to explain it away. Flash forward a few centuries, and Halloween looks different. The mushrooms are out. The chocolate is in, and everyone's just hoping their costume doesn't catch fire from the jack-o'-lantern. You don't have to dodge fairy circles or keep garlic on your person just to survive the night anymore, unless you live in a particularly competitive cul-de-sac. Gone are the days of root vegetable lanterns with existentially confused faces. Now it's all about plump orange pumpkins grinning like game show hosts, lined up on doorsteps and gently roasting the ankles of anyone who lingers too long near the porch. The costumes, once mostly designed to confuse vengeful spirits or that one insistent debt collector, have become their own industry. Kids, and more than a few adults, now dress up as superheroes, movie monsters, and the occasional sexy version of anything you can imagine, from fire hydrants to historical plagues. Somewhere along the way, the goal shifted from hiding your identity to winning the unofficial neighborhood costume contest, with bonus points for creativity and a strong social media presence. Trick or treating, meanwhile, has been standardized into a full-on sugar heist. Instead of pleading for soul cakes or a handful of oats, kids now prowl the suburbs, collecting enough candy to fund a dentist's vacation home. Parents trail behind, clutching travel mugs, and trying to pretend this is for the kids, and not just an excuse to inspect the hall for suspicious, delicious items. Even the threats have gotten cuter. Trick or treat now means give me a Snickers, or I might TP your shrubbery, a long way from medieval bribery, and the threat of bad luck until next Michaelmas. Decorations have leveled up too. Where once a wilted turnip lantern sufficed, now you're expected to produce a haunted house, synchronized light shows, and a fog machine that makes your driveway look like a set from a low-budget vampire movie. The local hardware store has an entire aisle dedicated to things that glow, inflate, or shriek at passers-by. The only mushrooms you're likely to see are the ones in a themed yard display, probably wearing sunglasses and waving at the mail carrier. The food has evolved as well. There are no more mushroom-laced stews that make you question reality, except, perhaps, at your weird neighbor's potluck. Instead, it's bowls of bite-sized chocolate bars, caramel apples, popcorn balls, and the annual ritual of trying to carve a pumpkin without losing a finger. Somewhere, a medieval ancestor is shaking their head at you, muttering about how you've traded a perfectly good hallucination for a sugar rush and a mild stomachache. Even the ghost stories have changed. Instead of tales whispered around a smoky fire, you get blockbuster movies, YouTube horror shorts, and podcasts full of true encounters with haunted Roombas. It's still about getting a little spooked, sharing a laugh, and pretending just for one night that the world is full of mystery and possibility. But now, the monsters live on your television, and the scariest spirit in the house is probably your Wi-Fi router. And yet, if you look closely, you can still spot the old traditions hiding under the layers of neon and chocolate. There's a bit of the medieval mischief in every costume party, a hint of the old superstition when someone jumps at a shadow, a trace of that ancient need to mark the passing of autumn with light, laughter, and just a hint of misrule. The methods may have changed, but the spirit, pun intended, remains the same. So as you drop another mini candy bar into a plastic pumpkin and compliment a kid's inflatable dinosaur suit, remember, you're part of a long, weird lineage of autumnal celebration. Whether it's fungi, fun size, or just a fondness for dressing up and running around after dark, Halloween keeps evolving but never ever gets less weird. Want to recreate the vibe? Gather some root vegetables, make a bonfire, and absolutely do not eat anything you find growing under a tree. Or do, just don't blame me if you end up conversing with the family dog. First, let's talk setting. You'll need a backyard or at least an obliging field. Somewhere you can pile up suspicious sticks, build a bonfire, and let the neighbors wonder if you've finally joined a Renaissance fair. Drag out old furniture, upturn buckets, and whatever logs you can find. Scatter blankets on the ground and insist that everyone sit close, partly for historical accuracy and mostly to avoid frostbite. Bonus points if you can get the local cats to wander through and stare at everyone with open disdain. Now, for decorations, resist the urge to go full Martha Stewart. Instead, raid your vegetable drawer and your sense of humor. Carve faces into turnips, beets, or any squash that's been loitering in your kitchen too long. Remember, the uglier the better. Lopsided eyes, squiggly mouths, and questionable dental work are all historically accurate. Arrange them on fence posts or along the path to your bonfire. If anyone asks why you didn't use pumpkins, tell them you're saving money on dental work for your ancestors' ghosts. Costumes should be a haphazard affair. Ask guests to come dressed as medieval peasants with access to a rag bin and no concept of fashion. Bonus points for mismatched shoes, wildly layered scarves, or a hat made from anything not technically a hat. If someone shows up looking like a disheveled scarecrow, congratulate them. They've nailed the look. Award prizes for best turnip, on the head and least likely to survive winter. Food, of course, is crucial. Serve up a hearty stew of root vegetables and beans, nothing too fancy. For snacks, offer dense bread, the kind that can double as a doorstop, questionable cheese, and apples roasted over the fire. Fill a cauldron with weak cider or herbal tea. Don't get clever and make it historically accurate, unless you have a trained medical professional and a goat standing by. If you really want to commit, offer a mystery stew and make everyone guess the ingredients. Whoever's closest wins the right to pick the next ghost story. Speaking of ghost stories, that's your main entertainment. As the night gets darker and the fire burns lower, gather everyone around and encourage them to tell the weirdest, wildest tales they can conjure. Bonus points if at least one story features a talking animal, a haunted vegetable, or a family member who gets turned into a frog. Interruptions from the wind, mysterious animal sounds, or your neighbor's ill-timed leaf blower should be treated as supernatural omens. Don't forget the superstitions. Have a bowl of salt handy for tossing over shoulders, sprigs of rosemary for guests to tuck behind their ears, and a little garlic to hang by the entrance. Warn everyone to avoid stepping into any suspicious mushroom circles, unless they want to spend the next week arguing with the family dog about turnip politics. Remind guests that it's tradition to leave out an extra bit of bread for wandering spirits, or for any neighbors who show up uninvited and hungry. Finally, when the night winds down, send your guests home with a hunk of bread, a wilted turnip lantern, and a stern warning. Whatever you do, don't tell the local priest about tonight, because while modern life has many perks, there's something oddly comforting about knowing you've spent an evening dodging imaginary curses, eating mildly alarming food, and laughing so hard your sides ache. Congratulations, you've just survived your own medieval Halloween, responsibly. If you wake up in the morning with straw in your hair and a vague memory of howling at the moon, consider it a historical success. And don't worry, the family dog has agreed not to mention a word. Every village has a story. The girl who saw fairies, the man who turned into a wolf, the goat who sang opera. At the root of every legend, you guessed it, mushrooms. It doesn't matter if you're deep in the forests of Eastern Europe or perched on a rocky outcrop in Ireland, wherever people gather, mushrooms follow, and soon after, so do the stories. There's just something about those little umbrellas sprouting up after rain, quietly promising a night of magic or disaster. The elders insist these myths are ancient wisdom, but sometimes you suspect it's just the side effect of eating the wrong stew on the wrong night. Take the fairy rings, for example. One step inside, and you're as likely to wake up 20 years older as you are with a strange haircut and a new opinion about turnip taxes. Children are warned to steer clear unless they want to be whisked away to dance for eternity with creatures who never tire and never, ever share their snacks. And yet, every year, someone dares the circle, usually the bravest or most gullible child in town. When they re-emerge, muddy and wide-eyed, the tale only grows. I saw a fairy riding a beetle. The beetle was in charge. Then there's the wolf man legend. Most villages have at least one. A quiet neighbor with a unibrow and an impressive howling ability disappears on a misty night, only to be spotted later running through the fields in a surprisingly stylish fur coat. Must be the mushrooms, everyone agrees, conveniently ignoring the bottle of homemade plum wine sitting empty on the windowsill. Still, the story sticks. By the next festival, every unexplained animal noise is attributed to Old Wolfie, and the villagers leave out scraps just in case. Animals, too, get their moment of fungal fame. If your sheep start forming a chorus line or the chickens cluck in harmony, it's not talent, it's toadstool trouble. The local goat is especially notorious, having allegedly serenaded the blacksmith with a stirring rendition of Ave Maria after a foraging spree. Nobody knows if it's true, but the goat now receives suspiciously polite applause every time it so much as bleats. These stories serve a purpose. In a world that's mostly dark, damp, and full of things that go bump, mushrooms offer an explanation for the inexplicable. Why did the weather change overnight? Why did Grandpa start speaking Latin? Why do we all remember a night that nobody will quite describe? Simple. Blame the mushrooms. They're a built-in excuse for everything from garden mischief to inconvenient transformations. It isn't just the villagers who keep the myths alive. Outsiders get swept up too. Traveling peddlers, curious monks, and bored noblemen all add their own spice to the tale. In my country, claims the merchant from 3 valleys over, the mushrooms sing lullabies to lost travelers, and if you sing along, you wake up with a pocket full of silver or frogs. Nobody can prove him wrong. So the myth gets a little wilder each year. The real secret, of course, is that people want to believe. There's comfort in knowing the world is strange and unpredictable, in thinking that a patch of fungi might open the door to adventure or a midnight miracle. It's a way to turn fear into laughter and boredom into legend. No small feat when winter is long and entertainment is whatever you can imagine or hallucinate. So the next time someone warns you about the mushrooms at the edge of the wood, take heed. Not because you'll sprout wings or join a goat choir, though, honestly, that sounds pretty fun, but because you're stepping into a tradition older than the hills and twice as likely to make you question reality. And in this village, that's just another night out. In the end, Halloween is about letting go, just for one night, whether it's spirits, mushrooms, or just the thrill of the unknown. Sometimes it's good to be a little scared, a little silly, and a little bit in awe of the weird, wild world. Maybe that's why, Year after year, people keep gathering by firelight, donning costumes, and swapping stories that make the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. It's not because anyone really wants to run into a vengeful ghost or see the neighbor's goat start reciting poetry again. It's because, deep down, there's a strange satisfaction in being unsettled, just enough to remind you you're alive, just enough to feel the world is bigger, stranger, and funnier than your usual daily routine. Throughout history, fear has been the secret ingredient in every good party. It brings people together, sparks laughter when the shadow was only a cat, and makes a creaky floorboard sound like a grand cosmic joke. The shared gasp when someone tells a ghost story, the thrill of not knowing what's behind the mask, or the nervous glance over your shoulder at an oddly shaped turnip in the dark. All these are little reminders that not everything is under your control. And that's kind of wonderful. Even in a world full of rules, chores, and responsibilities, Halloween is permission to embrace the unknown. For one night, you're not the responsible adult, the sensible parent, or the weary laborer. You can be a mischievous spirit, a monster, or just someone who wants to see how many root vegetables can be carved before the kitchen knife gives out. You get to lose yourself. Literally, sometimes, if your costume includes a particularly large potato sack, it's not just about being scared. It's about curiosity. You want to know what's out there in the dark, even as you cling to the safety of the firelight. You want to peek behind the curtain, see if the old stories are true, and maybe, just maybe, outwit whatever's lurking in the shadows. There's a reason every culture has its own version of the festival of fear, the chance to flirt with danger while staying just this side of disaster, to let your imagination run wild without actually losing a finger to a haunted pumpkin. And when the world feels confusing or overwhelming, a little fear, in a safe, candlelit, candy-filled package, is the ultimate comfort. You know you'll survive. You know you'll laugh about it in the morning. It's a chance to practice being brave when the stakes are nothing more than a gentle scare and a story to tell your friends. Besides, nothing bonds a community like arguing over who had the creepiest costume or whose lantern face was genuinely terrifying, on purpose or not. So, you lean into the chaos. You let the shadows play. You listen for the tap at the window, giggle at the neighbor's ghost, and pretend you don't see the cat plotting its annual midnight leap onto the bed, because this is how people have always made sense of the world. By telling stories, facing the unknown together, and turning fear into fun. Maybe you'll even admit you like being a little lost, just for a night. Just enough to remember how sweet it is to come home. As you drift off at the end of the festivities, still smelling of bonfire and slightly singed turnip, you realize that what makes Halloween special isn't the fear itself, but the freedom to feel it, to be surprised, to be silly, and to be swept up in a world that, for one night, is just a little more magical and a lot more mysterious than usual. And with that, you smile in the dark, knowing that even if you're a little bit lost tonight, you're in excellent company. The village feast is in full swing, and you're handed a suspiciously colourful casserole. Everyone's smiling a little too widely, and the local bard just started playing 3 songs at once. Was it camaraderie? Or did someone just sprinkle the special mushrooms into the mashed parsnips again? By dessert, you're pretty sure you saw your neighbor's hat give a rousing speech on turnip prices. You never really know what to expect at a medieval potluck. Sure, there will be bread so dense it could serve as emergency fortification. There'll be a communal pot of something brown and vaguely soupy, and a collection of pies that may or may not contain fruit, meat, or, once, a single sardine. But the wild card, the thing everyone watches out for with wary glee, is the mushroom dish. No one ever admits to being the one who brings it. Ask around and you'll get a lot of shrugs and, "Oh, it just appeared on the table." But everyone has a theory. The healer swears hers are safe. "Never pick anything that hums at you," she says. But her record includes one legendary stew that left half the village debating the ethics of milking imaginary cows for weeks. The blacksmith claims mushrooms are for the weak of spirit. "A real feast needs meat and ale," he says, before quietly scarfing down a double serving of the so-called spicy casserole. The symptoms are always the same. Giggles that bubble up out of nowhere, wildly imaginative conversations, and a tendency for the shyest villagers to suddenly wax poetic about their favorite root vegetables. The bard, usually a one-trick pony, launches into an energetic medley that includes animal impressions and at least one passionate ode to beetroot. You can't help but join in, even if your only contribution is a slightly off-key chorus about the noble turnip. As the evening stretches on, the stories become taller and the laughter louder. Someone claims to see the ghost of the village founder in the corner, shaking his head at the bread. Children race around pretending to be enchanted mushrooms. Adults debate the finer points of stew thickening. And at least one goat makes an unauthorized appearance, lured by the promise of discarded carrot tops. Food is passed around, sometimes twice, sometimes in the wrong direction entirely. You lose track of whether you're supposed to be eating the casserole, wearing it, or performing a dramatic reading of its ingredient list. The boundaries between dinner, theatre, and mild group hallucination blur, until nobody remembers exactly what started the fun. Amid the chaos, there's an unspoken agreement. No one blames the cook. It's a feast, after all. And feasts are for letting go of the day's worries. About the harvest, the weather, or that odd cough you've had since Michaelmas. If you accidentally end up reciting a love poem to a turnip or engaging in a heated debate with the roast chicken, so be it. It's all in good fun, and tomorrow's stories will be better for it. When the plates are finally cleared and the last embers of the bonfire die down, you're left with a strange mix of exhaustion and contentment. Your cheeks hurt from laughing. Your belly is full of something, possibly stew, possibly ambition, and the world feels a little softer, a little sillier. The only real consequence is that no one will ever trust the special casserole again, or at least not until next year. So you stagger home under a sky full of stars, your head buzzing with music, stories, and maybe just a hint of magic. And as you drift off to sleep, you think, this is what a feast is meant to be. Spicy, surprising, and just a little bit surreal. It's after midnight, and suddenly everyone's a comedian. Someone swapped your shoes with cabbages, the cows are wearing bonnets, and the village idiot has staged an elaborate fake haunting with only a sack and a candle. Are these elaborate attempts to confuse evil spirits, or is this just the medieval version of punked fueled by fungal bravado? The answer, as with most things tonight, is probably both. Mischief is the only currency that's never devalued in your village, and the hour after the bonfire is when the pranksters really come into their own. Even the most stoic elders find themselves caught up in the spirit. Or, more accurately, the spirits, plural, and possibly a little homebrewed encouragement. Everyone's a fool after midnight, and it's a badge of honor to be the architect of the year's most memorable trick. You quickly learn that nothing is sacred and no one is safe. Old Mrs. Darnley, usually as cranky as a hedgehog in winter, turns out to be the stealthiest prankster of them all, hiding a frog in the priest's collection plate and convincing half the children that she's actually a retired witch. The blacksmith, not to be outdone, manages to tie together the apron strings of 3 unsuspecting cooks, causing a small but hilarious culinary stampede when the midnight snack is announced. Every prank has a purpose, even if it's not obvious. Some are meant to keep evil spirits guessing if the cows are wearing bonnets. How will a mischievous ghost find the right target? Others are more practical, like switching your best hat for a turnip to ensure you don't get too full of yourself. The healer insists it's good for the community to air out their grievances in the form of well-timed whoopee cushions and strategically placed beetroot. According to her, laughter really is the best medicine. Unless, of course, you're the one who just sat in the surprise pudding. Of course, the tricksters aren't limited to simple slapstick. Some of the pranks are so elaborate they require weeks of planning and a suspicious amount of cooperation from local livestock. One year, the baker woke up to find his entire cart on the roof of the tavern, complete with a bread display and a sign reading "Heavenly Buns." Another time, the innkeeper discovered her beds stuffed with onions and her cats wearing matching scarves. No one ever confessed, but the village still refers to it as the Great Tabby Turnout. There's a strange camaraderie in being the victim of a prank. You might grumble as you fish your shoes out of the cabbage patch or chase a bonneted cow down Main Street. But you'll tell the story for years to come. There's no shame in being fooled, only in failing to appreciate the creativity behind it. Besides, you'll get your revenge next time. That's how it works. The prank cycle is unending. Like the tides or the mysterious way, soup always tastes better the day after a feast. By the time dawn starts to creep over the horizon, the pranks are winding down and the laughter is growing softer. People are tired, happy, and just a little bit wary of any unattended object that might explode into confetti or cluck like a chicken. You return home barefoot, hatless, and already scheming for next year. As you brush straw from your hair and count your remaining socks, you realize that the best part of the night wasn't the food or the stories. It was the laughter that echoed through the darkness, binding everyone together for another year. So next time you find a frog in your porridge or a cabbage in your boots, smile and tip your hat, if you can find it. In a world this uncertain, a little silliness is the surest sign that the village is still very much alive. And so, as the last embers of our medieval bonfire fade and the imaginary cows quietly stop narrating their life stories, it's time to leave behind the wild, slightly wobbly world of ancient Halloween. Tonight, you've survived haunted stews, trippy mushrooms, flying turnips, and enough questionable folk remedies to make your health insurance app spontaneously combust. If you manage to hang on to your dignity and your shoes through the parade of hallucinating neighbors and judgmental cats, congratulations. You did better than most. But let's take a moment to honor the real resilience of those who came before us. The villagers who faced long, cold nights with nothing but firelight, faith, and the occasional hallucinogenic fungus to get them through. They gathered in the dark, made each other laugh, shared bizarre tales, and did their best to explain the unexplained with the only tools they had. Stories, rituals, and when things got truly weird. A pocket full of mushrooms. It's easy to laugh at the past. But the truth is, their creativity, however unhinged, laid the foundation for every costume party, ghost story, and autumn bonfire we love today. They turned fear into fun, mystery into myth, and a dangerous night into a chance to celebrate the very strangeness of being human. Because history isn't just gross and terrifying, it's also proof that people are stubborn, hopeful, and endlessly inventive, even when half the village is seeing double. So tonight, as you drift off in your clean bed, behind double-paned windows, without a single hallucinating goat in sight, maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors. They braved lice, leeches, and soups that might accidentally make you see the spirit world, just so you could fall asleep to stories like these. May your dreams be free of talking pumpkins, and may your sleep be deep, peaceful, and utterly fungus-free. Good night.